6 years old. He was only 6 years old. He had just celebrated his birthday a few days before. 6 years old. None of us looking at a 6-year-old are going to see anything other than someone innocent, someone harmless. Yet looking at this 6-year-old, not everyone saw him that way. His neighbor, the man who had also rented an apartment to his mother and him, took a knife, a military-style knife, a brutal weapon, and viciously stabbed both him and his mother. His mother, though seriously injured, survived the attack. He didn't. 6 years old. And his life was ended by a man so blinded that he couldn't see an innocent 6-year-old anymore. All he could see was a Palestinian. A Palestinian, and to him all Palestinians were the enemy and needed to be put to death. Blinded by fear, blinded by some kind of strange indoctrination, whether that happened just within his own addled brain or whether it came from other sources. He was led to believe that even a 6-year-old could be such a threat that he should be put to death. Blinded by hatred. Blinded. Unable to see what really was in front of him. 5 members of a family. A grandmother, a father, a mother, a daughter, a son. 5 people spanning 3 generations out for a walk on an early summer evening, enjoying some fresh air during a time when many were staying indoors out of fear generated by a virus. 5 people waiting to cross the road when a black pickup truck suddenly comes roaring at them. No time to react. No time to get out of the way. 5 people struck down. 4 of the 5 didn't survive. 1 remains forever scarred by the events of that evening. Why? Why were they struck down? Was it some sort of terrible accident? Did the truck malfunction and just go out of control? We might hope that it was, but it wasn't. A young man was behind the wheel of that pickup. A young man blinded by hatred. So blind that he couldn't see a family, that he couldn't see people. So blinded that all he could see was an enemy. All he could see were Muslims. And to him, all Muslims were the enemy, and, well, they needed to be put to death. A man. A man in his early 30s, a man doing good, healing, helping, loving, teaching others to do the same thing that he was doing. A man we know as Jesus. First, the Pharisees came to him, the religious elite. But they were blinded by their religion. They were blinded by some distorted view of how they should honor God by keeping that religion pure. They were blinded by their desire to protect that religion from anyone who might interpret the scriptures in a different way than they did. In their blindness, they couldn't see that this man, this Jesus, was doing good, that he was a good man doing good deeds and teaching people to love God by loving others, all they could see was a threat to their teaching, a threat to their way of approaching God, a threat to their authority. All they could see was someone who was upsetting the delicate balance of power. So they came to Jesus, not to kill him, but to challenge his teaching, in hope that they could discredit him, in hope that they could embarrass him, in hope that they could put him in his place, so that they could go on being the teachers, the ones who truly had the authority. They came to trick him so that they could get the people to turn against him. The Pharisees came to Jesus. And the first time they came, they brought with them some of the Herodians. They had their own agenda. The Herodians were the supporters of King Herod, so their agenda was mainly political. They wanted to make sure that this puppet king stayed in place because, well, that gave them a sense of peace and security. They too were blinded by the desire for political power, blinded by their desire to support Herod as the true king of the Jews. After all, he had won the election. Oh, wait, that's someone else. They came to Jesus as well, not to kill him, but to trick him, to discredit him in the eyes of those who were following him so that he wouldn't be a threat to them any longer. The Pharisees came, the Herodians came, and the Sadducees also came. Like the Pharisees, the Sadducees were also blinded by their own particular religious beliefs. And like the Herodians, they were blinded by their desire to retain political power, the power that they had. In their blindness, they couldn't see Jesus for who he was. They couldn't see the good he was doing. They couldn't see how his actions, how his teachings were transforming the lives of the people. All they could see was a threat, an enemy, someone that needed to be neutralized. One of the Pharisees, a lawyer, an expert in the law, we are told, wanted to test Jesus. He thought somehow he knew all the answers, and he could trick Jesus. And so he asked a question to which he obviously thought he had the right answer, and was testing to see if Jesus would also give the correct, proper, authorized answer, the only acceptable answer. Which is the greatest commandment? The only acceptable answer is exactly what Jesus says. Love the Lord your God with your whole being, heart, soul, mind, body, strength, everything. Put it into loving God. The Pharisees would have applauded that answer, but perhaps it was their absolute belief in this that blinded them to anything else, and their misunderstanding of what it meant to truly love God. They saw their duty towards God as being above all else. The Sadducees would have applauded this Jesus' answer as well. This was one thing that the two groups actually agreed on. Perhaps the Herodians would have agreed also. Absolute love of God was the greatest commandment. But their devotion to keeping the commandment was blinding them to everything else, and sadly, to everyone else. Jesus tells them that this is the greatest commandment, but he tells them that it's also the first and greatest commandment, implying that there are more commandments which might be equally important. The second, like it in importance, like it in significance, like it because when you seek to fulfill the second, you're also fulfilling the first. The second, like it, love your neighbor as yourself. When Jesus reminds them to love their neighbor, he's quoting from Leviticus chapter 19. That Pharisee, that expert in the law, would have recognized that. He should have recognized this, and his own religion, if his own religion had not blinded him, he might have remembered that in the same part of Leviticus, God tells his people these things. When you reap the harvest of your land, do not reap to the very edges of your field or gather the gleanings of your harvest. Do not go over your vineyard a second time or pick up the grapes that have fallen. Leave them for the poor and the foreigner. I am the Lord your God. Do not steal. Do not lie. Do not deceive one another. Do not defraud or rob your neighbor. Do not hold back the wages of a hired worker even overnight. Do not curse the deaf or put a stumbling block in front of the blind. Do not pervert justice. Judge your neighbor fairly. Do not go about spreading slander among your people. Do not do anything that endangers your neighbor's life. When a foreigner resides among you in your land, do not mistreat them. The foreigner residing among you must be treated as your native born. Love them as yourself. All of those rules, laws, expressions, extensions fit into that whole package of loving your neighbor. On these two commandments, all the law and the prophets depend. Because you cannot claim to be showing love to God if you don't show love to those who bear God's image. Even when we hear that word neighbor, we're so tempted to limit it, aren't we? To make it as narrow as we possibly can so that I only have to love the people that look like me and act like me and are like me and, well, the people I already like anyway. But if that's all God's asking of us, then we too have become blinded. Blinded by our own desire to look good to ourselves, and then we don't see anything. God wants us to show love to those who bear his image, to those whom he loves, to your neighbor, to the stranger, to the foreigner, to the other. If you've never heard the term othering before, it's something we do all the time. Those people. Or if you heard the news and discussions about the current conflict in the Middle East, where each side is othering the other to the point that, I'm not even going to say that they're acting like animals, because that would be an insult to animals. They're worse than animals. That's truly othering. Dehumanizing them, so if they're not human, then they can't be my neighbor, so I don't have to love them. If they're not even as on a plane with animals that I like, then I don't have to think about them at all. And I can wreak whatever revenge I want on them. He was only 6 years old, but he became a victim of blind hatred. They were only a family out for a walk, yet they became victims of blind hatred. These examples are extreme, but they call us to examine ourselves, our own practices in relation to others, the way we seek to express our obedience to that command to love God and to love our neighbors as ourselves. They call us to ask God to open our eyes so that we can see where we are falling short and to give us the courage and strength to change. When you look into the face of a Palestinian child, what do you see? When you look into the face of a Palestinian man and woman in Gaza or in Strathroy, what do you see? When you look into the face of a Muslim family, what do you see? When you look into the face of an Indigenous Canadian, what do you see? When you look at a person of color or a homeless person, are you blinded by your own fears, your own prejudice? Are you blinded by things that you have been taught by others about others? Blinded by the things you've read? Blinded by the way others are portrayed? Or do you see in others the image of God? Do you see others as created like you, to bear that spark of who God is, to be being loved by God and worthy of being loved by you as well? Don't get me wrong. I know it's not easy. It's become ingrained in us so deeply to other people. From a very young age, probably all of us have been taught about stranger danger. We've carried prejudices with us from generation to generation to generation. Some of us have taught our children, our grandchildren, to be prejudiced just like us. It's not easy. When we are afraid, our natural tendency is to close our eyes, to blind ourselves, and to refuse to see the truth. But if we keep closing our eyes, we'll never see the truth. We'll never learn to truly love God by loving our neighbors as ourselves. Amen.